Hi, welcome everyone to the closing keynote panel on investing in the future women empowerment. I am pleased to invite our speakers that are on stage. In this session, we have Leslie Abbey from Hot Bread Kitchen. We have Kate Duff, the Vice President of Development at Echoing Green, Mary Ellen Iskenderian, the President and CEO of Women's World Banking, and Georgia Levenson Keohane, the CEO of the Soros Economic Development Fund, Open Society Foundations, and former adjunct professor of social enterprise at Columbia Business School as a moderator. So Georgia, I will pass off the mic to you so we can start the discussion and come back for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, and thank you all, everyone. I'm excited to be here for the Capital for Good session on investing in the future, women's empowerment. We're in for a real treat. So again, thank you, Maria Navarro, and all of the students who put on a terrific conference today. I know these take a lot of work, and it's been, I think, a rich set of sessions. So congratulations, and thank you also to my colleagues and friends at the Tamer Institute for Social Enterprise and Climate Change, Sandra Navali and Hannah Slow and Diana Rambeau, I think is somewhere here, and over there, and and Allison and Bruce and Dan. And Tamer is just a very special place, and I'm very grateful to have been a part of it in some way for many years. I think this is the last panel and last session. We're standing between you guys and reception. so we promise a lot of food for thought, if not food per se, although we're going to talk about food. And I'm just really delighted today to be able to be the point guard on an all-star panel. You have bios for everyone, very detailed bios, so I won't go into too much detail, except to say that we have extraordinary women here working in many different ways on women's economic empowerment, some focused on entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurship, some focused on financial inclusion and access to capital, some working really globally, some working very locally here in New York City, but in many different ways working on women's empowerment and in economic and otherwise. So as we're going to hear from, as you've heard, Leslie Abbey, who's right next to me, the CEO of Hot Bread Kitchen. She herself is an exceptional social entrepreneur, nonprofit leader who is today overseeing the execution of Hot Bread's Kitchen new plan to support 1,000 breadwinners across New York City and to reach into all 5 boroughs. Kate Duff, who's the Vice President of Development at Echoing Green, an organization that for 35 years has worked at the intersection of social justice and social innovation, supporting close to 1,000 emerging leaders and social entrepreneurs around the world. And Mary Ellen Iskenderian, the President and CEO of Women's World Banking, really a pioneer of financial inclusion for women and gender lens investing. And Women's World Banking has reached more than 68 million women globally through its programs. And the last thing I would say before we start some of the questions is that each of these women on our panel really exemplify the kind of leadership we need to advance this work and are an inspiration for all of us. So not just the women that they serve, but I think all of us in the field. Thank you. Why don't I start really asking each of you, and we can go down the line. So Leslie, I'll start with you. If you could talk a little bit about your career, the arc of your career, so the various work and jobs and roles you've had that have gotten you to this point, the work that you lead now, and how you think about and then actually implement women's empowerment.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for having me and as a representative of Hot Bread Kitchen here today. I'm so grateful. So before I get to me, I'll just give you like the 2-minute version of what Hot Bread Kitchen does. We started out as a social enterprise nonprofit organization here in New York City. We ran a bakery not far from here. The bakery trained, at the time, immigrant women, and we baked breads from all over the world. They brought their recipes to the bakery and sold it, and the proceeds from the bakery went to supporting the nonprofit mission, which was to train women to really diversify kitchens around the city. Today, but even more so back then, which was about 16 years ago. If you look at kitchens in restaurants and other commercial establishments, it's mostly men in those kitchens. And so the idea was to diversify kitchens and to open up the opportunities of the food and hospitality industry to women. Today we have evolved. The bakery has closed, unfortunately, because the nonprofit mission really kind of took over, and it was very hard to be running a bakery and doing job training and job placement around the city. And so back then we were supporting literally 20 women a year. Today it'll be 550 women this year, and it'll be more than that next year. So we've grown tremendously. So today we do culinary training and job placement for hundreds of women and gender expansive people, not just in baking, all types of food industry jobs, prep cook jobs, restaurant cook jobs. We're now starting to get into upskilling, so we're training folks for front of house jobs and for kitchen management jobs. And the idea is to really leverage the food industry as a catalyst for economic mobility. And then the other side of our work is that we help women entrepreneurs incubate and grow small food businesses. This year we're working with about 130 aspiring entrepreneurs or actual entrepreneurs begin their businesses, access capital, access markets, and build social capital to really build their businesses. So that's what Hot Brick Kitchen does. Just one last piece, which is that we're very holistic. We're not just doing the vocational work or the support for entrepreneurs. We are also providing case management, emergency funds, English for speakers of other languages, lots of other case management services to really scaffold our services and help pave the way for success. So when thinking about, I'll just say how I got to this role. First of all, I'm a good example of not a straight path. I get a lot of students or young professionals in their early in their careers sort of asking, how did I get here? And I sometimes say it might look like every decision was sort of led me to this perfect path, but I can tell you that a lot of it was just the opportunity involved, the energy in the office, the people I was going to be around, and sort of the interesting work that was going to happen. So that's number one. And just secondly, in thinking about this, I was a women's studies, back then we called it women's studies concentrator in college. And, I think that really, I did that because I love critical thinking. I love looking at the world from a vantage point that is not the majority view. And so you can see sort of in my career, just different ways of doing that, whether it's working with youth in the juvenile justice system, working with folks who are chronically homeless looking for housing, and now helping women really break into a field that there just aren't that many women in, and sort of figuring out how to do that. All of those things, to me, have to do with feminism and critical thinking, and that's really, I think, how I got here.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Duff, and I'm the Vice President of Development at Echoing Green. Echoing Green is a nonprofit organization, so development means fundraising. I'm responsible for philanthropic fundraising for my organization. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Echoing Green does, and then I'll tell you a little bit about myself. EG provides access to capital to social innovators. We do this through a fellowship program that provides startup grants to founders. We've been doing it for 37 years. I can't wait until I can say 40 or 50. We have just about 1,000 fellows worldwide. We're at 967. And we've made $55 million of direct investments in the social innovation sector that in turn has been leveraged into about $10 billion by our fellows. More than half of our fellows are women. 85% of them worldwide currently identify as BIPOC. And they include women like Wendy Kopp, who's the founder of Teach for America, Morgan Dixon and Vanessa Garrison of Girl Trek, which is the largest nonprofit for Black women's health in North America, Jessamine Ward, who of Hot Bread Kitchen. And as you can see, these are wildly different organizations that empower women in really different ways. But at the heart of it all really is access to capital. And so I'm excited to talk about that a little bit more today. I'll also add that we have a great track record at Echoing Green. 80% of our organizations survive 5 years out. 87% of our founders remain in the sector today. So it's a really exciting place to be. I'll tell you about myself. This is a school, and I will say that my education had a profound impact on my career trajectory, but like Leslie's, my career was not a straight path. So my high school had a very strong service orientation. We talked about a core value of a social awareness that impels to action, and that was really part of our values. We were always out marching. We were very into current events. So obviously I took that, and then I went to law school and did what everybody expects, which is take a big corporate law firm job at a Wall Street firm and start to help one successful company sue another successful company for a living. Right. We've seen this movie before. We know how this story ends, right? But as I began to look for something a little bit more in my work and find that something was in conflict, right, with my educational DNA and where I wanted to be putting my efforts professionally, I began to explore the social enterprise, social innovation sector. And just about every time I learned about an organization that I thought was doing incredible work, you scratch the surface and trace it back to Echoing Green. And so I was really, really thrilled to join Echoing Green, really because I think that social innovation is about optimism, it's about enthusiasm, it's about promise, it's about capital for good. And that makes me really excited to raise as much money as possible for organizations that are empowering women and empowering women founders. So thank you.
I'm realizing what a well-curated panel this is. We all fit in very nicely together. So I'm Mary Ellen Iskenderian. I'm the president and CEO of Women's World Banking. We are celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. And from our founding, we've really been, like you've heard a couple times already, about providing access to financial services. Our work, though, has been with low-income women throughout the Global South. And we really got our founding in the microfinance movement. But when I joined the organization in 2006, I didn't necessarily know it at the time, but it was literally within months of the introduction of M-Pesa, which many of you may have heard of as really the first mobile money product on the market out of Kenya. And that really just changed everything so dramatically in terms of being able to deliver financial services to low-income people at a much, much lower cost, certainly than microfinance had been doing, but even lower than traditional banks. And so lots of different players came into the market. So it was a really wonderful time to be entering the financial inclusion space. And since then, we really work sort of at three levels. We do a lot of work with financial services providers, still some microfinance institutions, but largely banks, fintechs, insurance companies, neobanks, lots of cell phone companies that we work with, design products that explicitly meet women's needs and are designed very deliberately around that. We also have a very active policy advocacy role, both locally, trying to get regulators moving in the right direction for inclusive policy and financial regulation, but we also work at the global level. We're the only NGO that actually is credentialed for the financial inclusion work at the G20. And so we're very involved in making sure that women's financial inclusion, women's economic empowerment stays front and center in the G20 agenda. But I think the part that you're not supposed to favor one of your children over another, but the part of the business that I like most, and I just think the impact we're able to have through our gender lens investing funds has been really quite outsized. We've got right now 150 million, a little bit more than 150 million assets under management, invested in 21 inclusive finance organizations, again, across the Global South, that are doing just amazing work in making sure that women have access to affordable, convenient, secure financial services, and I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit more about that. I guess in comparison, perhaps I'm more linear. I've like kind of always been a banker, but sort of gradually finding my way to this work. I started my career as a foreign currency trader at the Bank of America. And if you ask my family, they think the only thing I really learned how to do there, but this is a really good skill, is to swear very effectively and profusely on the trading floor. And then I went into investment banking. Swearing was very helpful there as well. But I really just, I didn't realize how absolutely essential it is to be motivated by money, to work there. It's just so hard, and the hours are so long, and it's so much about helping one really successful company do something terrible to another successful company that you kind of have to love that. And I got very lucky that I was working on a deal very late at night with a woman who had done a lot of things at the World Bank, but had run the Young Professionals program at the World Bank. And my undergraduate degree had been in development economics. I'd always kind of eyed the bank as the place I wanted to go to. And she said, "You will be such an outlier. Nobody, leaves Wall Street to go to the World Bank. And it tends to be a lot of PhD economics types, but let's give it a shot." And she gave me a very gracious reference, and I got into the program. And it was 6 months before the Berlin Wall fell, so I'm totally dating myself here. And I, for the next 10 years, just had literally a front row seat to history in creating and bringing back to life stock exchanges and financial regulations and securities commissions and all sorts of financial institutions, privatizing state-owned banks across Eastern Europe and then into the former Soviet Union. It was really an extraordinary period of time. I got to do some work in Latin America and South Asia in microfinance and really got a taste of it, although I was at the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, and they were working at just the tippy top of the iceberg of microfinance. It was really only those organizations that were doing very, very commercial finance. And I just was feeling like I was getting further and further and further away from the people that I had gone into development to serve as I had a career trajectory. And I got headhunted by a microfinance organization that wasn't really a great fit for me or for them, but it got me really intrigued by what microfinance might actually entail and how broad that career might be. So a few months later, when Women's World Banking also came through a headhunter, it just seemed like such a good fit. I didn't do women's studies, though. I had no particular gender focus. I feel like I was raised a good Catholic girl. I think I'm going to be paying a penance because I never once asked a banker at the World Bank when I was working there, how many women clients do you have? How many women are you lending to? Are repayment rates different for women than for men? Never asked that question. And so I'm so grateful that the board took a chance on me and brought me on board. But as all of you know, you don't spend very much time in development before you see very quickly that it is women who are doing the work of development, and getting them access to finance really is what drives lasting change in their lives, their families' lives, their communities' lives. And I've never looked back.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to go back for a minute, Mary Ellen, to the fall of the Berlin Wall to frame the next question. So if we think about the last several decades, by that time horizon and vantage point, we've made huge strides, I think, on many dimensions, if we think about women's economic empowerment and inclusion globally. On the other hand, also setbacks, particularly the last few years with the pandemic and inflation and deep indebtedness in a lot of countries, immigration. I mean, there are many challenges, and I say this 10 days away from a very consequential election here, where we may or may not elect the first woman and woman of color to the presidency here. So the question is half empty, or is the glass half empty or half full when it comes to women's economic empowerment? How do you think about some of the deep challenges that you have seen in your work, but also what are some of the opportunities? What makes you hopeful? And again, we can go down the line.
We'll go down the road. Okay. Well, let me start with just sort of the things that I think are still challenging, and these are things that Hot Kitchen is trying to address. On the small business side, so we're helping entrepreneurs with cooking food industry businesses. They're small businesses. They typically are members. We call our members because once a member, always a member of Hot Kitchen. They're typically baking or cooking out of their home, their apartment, and they're the person who bakes and cooks for every family gathering and maybe even is selling like to their neighbors down the street, and they think they can make a go of it, and they'd like to try to do that. And so they come to us saying, how do I kind of take this to the next level? That's at the beginning. And then we have sort of later on folks who are at that stage where they're just hitting a wall. They can't really grow anymore without bringing some capital into their businesses. I think the biggest challenge, and I'll just say really quickly, like an example of that is now a good friend named Jess Ortiz. Her company is called A Jess Cookie. You can look it up on the web. She'll send cookies to you, and it's an e-commerce business. She's New Yorker, and so she has Puerto Rican, New York cookies, and she's right now, I mean, it's a thriving business, but it's out of her apartment. That's where she's baking things. So I think the challenge that we're seeing is just the incredible lack of investment, frankly, in women-owned businesses. And for women of color-owned businesses, it's like even more paltry than it is for just globally for women. Like if you take the women of color as a subset of women entrepreneurs. Today, still, only 2% of venture capital funding goes to women-owned businesses, and women of color receive less than 1%. So that's a pretty daunting number, and again, is something that we are really working on. And then, in general, and this is sort of not surprising, but business ownership too is less than the representation of women is less than the general population, and in food leadership, less than 7% of restaurants are owned by women. And it's funny, we see this when we're also looking to make partnerships for our fundraising events, and we kind of have to balance. We love chefs that are women, and we partner with them so much, and yet they don't really have the same name recognition as if you think of a chef that maybe you all know, it's probably a white man is who you know by name. And so we're really trying to sort of lift up these women business owners, and it's hard. The numbers are just really, really, really low. On the upside, women angel investors and funding for women-led companies is dramatically rising, which is great. There is just an incredible groundswell. Now, granted, we're talking from teeny tiny to big to somewhat bigger, but still there is a groundswell of interest on both sides. We have more than 200 food employers coming to us asking for our graduates to be placed in their kitchens. And our funding for our small business program has like quadrupled just in the last 2 years alone. And so there seems to be real recognition that entrepreneurship and business ownership is a real pathway to opportunity, and that there are folks that have been left behind. And there's sort of a philanthropic sector and a public sector that's really interested and curious about how to lift those folks up. And we're seeing steps going in the right direction. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Leslie. Certainly lack of investment in women and lack of access to capital for women is the half-empty version of the glass. And that is what we are working against at Echoing Green. And I think, when we're thinking about venture capital or fundraising in general for women-owned ventures, we're all very familiar with the gender gap in fundraising, right? It really ticks me off that men get asked about their vision, they get asked about their potential profits, about their hopes, about their achievements, about their advancements, and women tend to get asked about things like the potential risks and losses, about safety, responsibility, security, vigilance, logistics. So really, without even realizing it, people in power tend to assume sometimes that men have already proven themselves, while they don't assume the same thing for women. And we're seeing this play out on a national scale right now, right? Like that this plays out in so many different places. And so how to fight against that, right? And there's a few different answers, and we know that we need more women in leadership positions, and we also just need more capital going to women-run ventures. So in spite of a somewhat dismal landscape, I'm very optimistic because I think there are great organizations out there doing work for this, and I'm proud of what Echoing Green is doing. We have had the same woman CEO for over 20 years, and not because it is trendy to have a woman as your CEO, but because it is essential if you want to get work done and if you want to model correct behavior. We also have an all-women leadership team. Every single senior role at our organization is held by a woman. So think about that for a second, because decisions about both our programs and our investments, but also our operations are made by women. And that really makes a difference when you're choosing corporate health insurance, just as much as it is when you're running a program. So leadership is part of it, but on the capital side, that's part of the solution too. And so some of the things that we've done, we have standardized and done a lot of work and research on our selection process to do our best to reduce gender and other biases in our programs. We've also added more capital offerings to our suite. So Echoing Green's signature program has always been startup grants, early stage funding. But the problem that we saw is that we'd launch amazing founders, and then maybe 5 to 10 years out, good ventures were getting a little bit stuck, right? Because the traditional capital markets just didn't have a product for them to de-risk and scale in an appropriate way. So we decided to create it ourselves. And we've recently added a catalytic capital program that's called the Signal Fund that offers a new suite of financial products that are very flexible and that are founder forward. Okay, so we're talking about things like concessionary debt, safe notes, recoverable grants. And these are products that allow our fellows to de-risk and scale on terms that are otherwise not available in the commercial markets. It's essential for social innovation because the products just aren't there to get social innovation enterprises off the ground. We've piloted it successfully with 2 women founders. It's working. And now we think of ourselves as really providing a continuum of capital. So for all phases in the entrepreneurial life cycle. So we've got the startup funding, and then we've got things that are beyond launch as well. So I'm optimistic. I'm going to go with glass half full that women leaders can create great social ventures, and that as leaders, we implement policies and also products that serve those who have historically been underserved.
Well, I'm going to go with women's leadership as well, but maybe with a slightly different angle. And maybe it is to maintain the optimism that you introduced into the conversation, Kate, because, in my field in finance, the numbers are still kind of dismal. I think it's still not a whole lot more than 25% of executive positions in the finance industry are held by women. We have incredible individual examples of, Jane Fraser and, potentially Jamie Dimon's successor being a woman. I mean, we've got these great examples, but there's still not a systemic movement. I think we still are only 14 central bank chairs, central bank governors are women, and we celebrate, everyone, because we do see such tremendous changes in policy focus when a woman is leading regulatory bodies. But where I'm drawing real optimism, and where my fear of the half full glass kind of kicks in, is that enough people have been looking at women's leadership issues for long enough now that we've got some amazing data and amazing connections and outright correlations between women's leadership and some really amazing outcomes. I can tell you in our portfolio, our investment portfolio, something that we suspected for a very long time, but we can now say really with complete certainty. If you want to reach more women clients, and I'm happy to say that more and more financial service providers do want to reach more women clients, see women clients as a viable segment that they are missing, that are bringing us into their cap table because they want an investor that cares about serving more women clients. If you want to reach more women clients, then hire more women. And there's a very clear connection between not just women, the 3 women at the board or 1 or 2 women in the C-suite, but all the way through the organizations. It has a dramatic impact on the women that you're actually going to be able to serve. We also see real correlations between having women in leadership positions, particularly in credit granting positions, if you're in a lending organization, and the size of loan. Women are better repayers of loans, not just microfinance. I think there'd been this long-held belief that, once you got into that SME category, that small and medium-sized enterprise, women weren't so great. But when you correct for lots of other noise, repayment rates are much higher for women, and loan sizes were just really, really lagging. And so that's something that we've come to really push for, to make sure that women are not just getting access to capital, but access to enough capital to really grow their businesses. Where I'm also very excited about some of the data that we're seeing is the linkage between women's leadership and climate. And there, it's really quite remarkable. You're seeing throughout the global South the national commitments that countries are making for COP coming up in November, but in the last several years. They're putting on their national plans, their national climate plans, things like lowering the wage gap, making efforts to increase the number of women on board, increasing women's leadership across the private sector. They are seeing that linkage between making progress in climate action and women's leadership, which is super exciting. I saw some really fascinating data. The European Investment Bank has been particularly good about putting out data that companies that have at least one woman on their board have a 0.6% growth rate of emissions over the last 5 years, compared to a 3.5% annual growth rate in climate emissions compared to boards that don't have women on them. And you've seen them at the national government level. If there are more women in parliament, you see much, much more progressive climate policies. There's a real correlation between women's leadership and outcomes that we want to see in lots of other areas. And so I'm so excited and so hopeful about what this country might be able to accomplish in those 10 days in terms of modeling women's leadership, but also terribly afraid that we may be headed backwards. But it certainly feels like the rest of the world is moving ahead on these issues.
Before I open up for questions, I'm going to do a speed round, I think, on the last one, and maybe we'll go this way, Mary Ellen. I'll give it. So you just talked about the nexus between gender and climate, and I think the Tamer Institute is now officially called Tamer Institute for Social Enterprise and Climate Change. And as we think about students finishing their MBAs and going out into the world in choosing careers that may or may not, or intentionally focus on women's empowerment, whether it has a climate piece or not, how would you encourage students in graduating this year or soon and embarking in the world on a career focused on women's empowerment?
Oh, what a great question. I mean, certainly if you're looking at it through the finance lens, I always like to tell students, and this may not be an answer people want to hear, but getting like a really firm grounding in your basic finance skills, basic banking skills, and then you need to know what the mainstream looks like so that you can start to build in the deviations or the innovations or the different ways of looking at things, so that you can see, because we see this all the time, that a banking product is more or less going to be designed by men for men. And those very often don't work for women. There's lots of elements that a woman needs to have in a product: security, confidentiality, convenience, that just aren't top of the list for men, but really make all the difference for women. But a product designed by women for women tends to be very, very popular with men, and it really does work both ways. So I think getting that grounding in the mainstream so that you can innovate from that would be my advice.
That's great. We always talk about learning the rules before you can start breaking them, right?
Oh, that's great.
Look, you're students, and I'm so excited to see what is next for you. I sit here really having been on the journey of finding my place in the world professionally, and I know that for you, there is a tremendous amount of pressure to figure out what it is you want to do and to start doing it right away. And I think that is an incredibly difficult position to put people in, and particularly for careers in social innovation, there is really not a direct path that you can follow to get from sort of your entry-level job into your senior job. And so it is very, very likely that you are going to have many roles where you will pick up different skills that are useful to you, and you can plan for that and expect that. And it's actually one of the joys of life is having the opportunity to find your way through those kinds of roles and build skills along the way. So don't think that the first job that you have is the thing that you're going to be forever. I remember at every decade interval in my life thinking that was true, and I know that it's not even true now, right? So there's so much potential. Look, you are going to have a role in shaping what the new vision of women's economic empowerment means. Some of you will go to work at organizations and you'll do it from within. Some of you might start organizations of your own. If you do, I hope that you'll think of Echoing Green. We are here for you. And good luck. I'm excited for you. You got this.
Okay, I'll take speed round to heart, and I will just say two things. One is that I ask all of you sort of to do what I was sort of saying I did after I graduate, which is just to think critically. Wherever you land, think about sort of who the system is designed for, I think to Mary Ellen's point, and think about who's being left out, and think about sort of, if you turned it on its side, what that would mean for whoever it is that's being left out of whatever it is that you're designing your systems for. So that's number one. But secondly, I just encourage all of you, even if you don't go to a nonprofit, to get involved in nonprofits. We have at Hot Break Kitchen a young professional committee. Would be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in joining it. I think we have somebody from the business school on the committee. We take folks on our board. There's another, I should mention too that I'm a co-founder of two different nonprofits. One of them also has a recent CBS alum on our board. So think about nonprofits and just, jump in and get involved.
All right, thank you. So can we open it up for questions? Okay. Do we have time? We have time for that. Mary, what's the best way to field?
I can give you guys the questions, and then we can.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So we're using Slido, so people put their questions
right,
in, and
okay,
then so if you want to continue sending questions, and then they like them. But for now, some of the most voted ones would be: what is the main bias that the world has to overcome that disadvantage women at the moment, and how can men be active allies for these disadvantages? If you want to go.
So say the main bias that
women are facing right now, and how can men be active allies to help advance that bias?
Takers.
Sure. Well, certainly, the main, I think you hit some of the main biases we see again in the access to finance. Just the number of women founders I talk to who either have invented a man that is in the founding of the company that they refer to when they're pitching a VC, or bring a man along because they're just not going to get a hearing from that. There's just an extraordinary bias still in the access to finance, access to investment. We are doing a huge amount of work with fintech companies that will design a credit algorithm based on cell phone data But they'll be doing it in countries where women are in India, women are probably about 20% less likely to own a smartphone, let alone have data that can then get put into a credit scoring module. So they are routinely rejected as not creditworthy customers because the elements in the algorithm don't speak to the women's experience. So we've kind of built a little side business on helping companies redo their algorithms so that they really reflect women's experience. So I think maybe the biggest bias is just acknowledging there is bias and look for how you can address it and how just assume it's there and actively, proactively work against it, design against it.
Yeah, thank you. And to add to that, I think, look, there are different ways to answer this question based on whether you're working in a domestic context or in an international or local context. I think one of the biggest biases that we see is that the problem is fixed, right? That we have parity, that we all have access to the same kinds of education and opportunities and get promoted at the same rates. And yet the data show us again and again and again that something is not quite right. So how can men be effective allies? How can we all be effective allies here? Really ensuring that we promote and support women on our teams, that we, it's not enough just to have one woman on the team, right, or one woman in the room, but really looking to bring women to the highest levels of leadership and maintain them there throughout all organizations.
I mean, there's not much more I can say to those pieces, and I'll just go super micro here in New York City, which is find women-owned businesses and support them. Look around, find those restaurants for us at least that are owned by women, and actually go make reservations and go have dinner there, and sort of be active in sort of who it is that you're patronizing. So.
Okay, perfect. I'll go to the next one, which relates a lot to what you were saying. People were asking about any social events or networking events where women can go and talk about this and have the conversation and meet more people in the space.
Well, I'll just add, there are, Hopper Kitchen is a young professional committee. A lot of nonprofits do. I very much, recommend getting out there and looking around at the work that's already being done and just kind of jumping in to be part of that. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I'd agree. Definitely. See if you can join a board. That is a really fantastic way to meet people in the space. And then also, if you are going to work for a corporation, look to see if they have a corporate foundation and look to see what they're doing and how that work connects. They will be partnering with local, national, and international nonprofits. It will be a great way to network. And conferences like this, right? This is an incredible opportunity as well.
I think the affinity groups in companies are, definitely join and push the agendas of those groups to support. I think a lot of times they get to be, importantly about the internal dynamic, but you can, and we work with a couple of organizations that have really active women's affinity groups that work with external organizations very powerfully. So be that voice within the affinity group.
I would just add to underscore the point about this conference or affinity groups. I mean, I would look to you all, you can look for those opportunities outside, but also just organize them, like this conference, like the affinity groups at school or in companies. And I think, if I think about some of the pushback now against, diversity efforts more broadly, everybody's feeling a chill, and it's even more important than to say we want to have this group at our school or at our company. And I think just the act of organizing them, others will come.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And join me in thanking our amazing keynote speakers for this panel.